Hello, hello, hello. It is Saturday. It is time to read. I don't know. Hope everybody's having a good weekend at the end of a pretty rough week, let's be honest. I don't know. I don't know what to do with my hands, so I shuffle around with books. I'm just going to kill time at the beginning of this thing. Give people a chance to show up. I don't want anybody to have to come in to the middle of, the first story. So I'll just ramble a little bit first at the beginning of this. Tonight I'm going to be reading from Joy Williams, one of my favorite short story authors. Interestingly, she also writes novels, but I still have yet to read any of her novels. Not for any particular reason. I just haven't found them at the used bookstores. The only one I finally found one, was her most recent one called Harrow. I've got that back in my room. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I don't know. She's got others: The Quick and the Dead, Breaking and Entering. I think one called The Changeling or something like that. But yeah, I've picked up all of her books used over the years at used bookstores, but I only seem to find her story collections, and that's fine. I love short stories, but yeah, so I still got to get my hands on Joy Williams's novels and give those a read. But I don't know. I think I've read all of her story collections at this point. She kicked it off with Taking Care, I think back in the 70s, maybe. Although obviously this is the vintage contemporaries paperback from like the 80s. I love that design forever. She had Escapes, her second collection. That's what I'll be reading from tonight. I've already read most of the stories in here through reading this later book she did called The Visiting Privilege. This collects a lot of her previous work in these three story collections. I forgot to mention Honored Guest. But this is a really good bang for your buck book if you just want to get a bunch of her work all in one place all at the same time, because it's got, the collected stories section, which has most, if not all, or most but not all of the stories in these previous collections. Plus, I think 15 new stories at the time that this was published, and this was in 2015. I don't know. Where is the table of contents? I'm so professional at this, can't you tell? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 new stories. One of which I hope to get to tonight, and I will save to the end. But tonight, I'm going to be reading from Escapes, which was her second collection, from 1990. Yeah. This was published by Atlantic Monthly Press. It's a cool book, man. I've been looking for Escapes for years. I didn't care which version it was. I didn't care if it was this hardcover or, the paperback and the vintage contemporaries. There's also another like hardcover edition. I think it was the British one, but having strangely never come across a copy in my travels, aside from the paperback once, but it had a lot of highlighting and underlining, so I didn't buy it. Finally got this, Escapes, and for a steal. I mean, I don't know. I think it was like $6 or something. And, the jacket's not in the best shape. It's price clipped. And the book, at some point, So it might be hard to tell. Got a little bent. uh, but it's fine. The pages are clean. The little bend to it doesn't really affect it much in terms of functionality. So no big deal. Here, I'm going to put it in the chat just in case people come in and want to know what this is. Stories from Escapes by Joy Williams. Let's see. So I guess I'll get into it, man. Let's see. I don't know. A little slight more ramble. Joy Williams, I really like because the language is very simple, and it's really direct. But it's very poetic, and there's a lot left up to the imagination. It's the kind of stuff I think about for a long, long, long time after reading, and yeah, I don't know. She's just amazing. I don't think I've read a single weak story from her so far, which is amazing considering how many she's written. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing but admiration for Joy Williams around here. Also, because I'm a nerd, I hear she uses typewriters exclusively, specifically Smith Corona typewriters, which I am very much a fan of. So, yeah, add that to one of my typewriters is called Joy. I have a 5 series clipper from the 1950s. And I named it Joy for her. All of my typewriters are named for authors. Excuse me. I'm a little bit stuffy. I'm not sick. I just forgot to take my allergy medicine last night. And it's sneaking up on me now. So apologies if I'm a little bit nasal tonight. Anyway, let's get into it, as they say. I'm going to be reading first, if I could get to the right page. This first story I'm going to be reading tonight is called Rot, R-O-T, not like wrought iron, just rot, as in rotting. And again, this is from the book Escapes by Joy Williams. Thank you all for being here. Rot. Lucy was watching the street when an old Ford Thunderbird turned into their driveway. She had never seen the car before, and her husband, Dwight, was driving it. One of Dwight's old girlfriends leapt from the passenger seat and ran toward the house. Her name was Caroline. She had curly hair and big white teeth, more than seemed normal, and Lucy liked her the least of all Dwight's old girlfriends. Nevertheless, when she came inside, Lucy said, "Would you like a glass of water or something?" "I was the horn," Caroline said. "That car doesn't have one, so I was it. I'd yell out the window, 'Watch out!'" "Were you the brakes too, or just the horn?" Lucy asked. "It has brakes," Caroline said, showing her startling teeth. She went into the living room and said, "Hello, rug." She always spoke to the rug lying there. The rug was from Mexico, with birds of different colors flying across it. All of the birds had long white eyes. Dwight and Caroline had brought the rug back from the Yucatan when they had gone snorkeling there years before. Some of the coves were so popular that the fish could scarcely be seen for all the suntan oil floating in the water. At Garrafon in Isla Mujeres, Dwight told Lucy he had raised his head and seen 100 people bobbing face down over the rocks of the reef, and a clean white tampon bobbing there among them. Caroline had said at the time, It's disgusting, but it's obviously some joke. Caroline muttered little things to the rug, showing off, Lucy thought. Although she wasn't speaking Spanish to it, she didn't know Spanish. Lucy looked out the window at Dwight sitting in the Thunderbird. It was old with new paint, black, with a white top and portholes and skirts. He looked a little big for it. He got out abruptly and ran to the house as though through rain, but there was no rain. It was a gray, still day in spring, just before Easter, with an odious weight to the air. Recently, when they had been coming inside, synthetic stuff from Easter baskets had been traveling in with them, the fake nesting matter, the pastel and crinkly stuff of Easter baskets. Lucy couldn't imagine where they kept picking it up from, but no festive detritus came in this time. Dwight gave her a hard, wandering kiss on the mouth. Lately, it was as though he were trying out kisses, trying to adjust them. "You'll tell me all about this, I guess," Lucy said. "Lucy," Dwight said solemnly. Caroline joined them and said, "I've got to be off. I don't know the time, but I bet I can guess it to within a minute. I can do that," she assured Lucy. Caroline closed her eyes. Her teeth seemed still to be looking out at them, however. 5:10, she said after a while. Lucy looked at the clock on the wall, which showed 10 minutes past 5. She shrugged. "That car is some cute," Caroline said, giving Dwight a little squeeze. "Isn't it some cute?" she said to Lucy. "Your Dwight's been tracking this car for days." "I bought it from the next of kin," Dwight said. Lucy looked at him impassively. She was not a girl who was quick to alarm. "I was down at the aquarium last week looking at the fish," Dwight began. "Oh, that aquarium," Lucy said. The aquarium was where a baby seal had been put to sleep because he was born too ugly to be viewed by children. He had not been considered viewable, so off he went. The aquarium offended Lucy. "I like fish," Dwight had told Lucy when she asked why he spent so much of his free time at the aquarium. "Men like fish." "And when I came out into the parking lot, next to our car was this little Thunderbird, and there was a dead man sitting behind the wheel." "Isn't that something?" Caroline exclaimed. "I was the first to find him," Dwight said. "I'm no expert, but that man was gone." "What did this dead man look like?" Lucy asked Dwight. He thought for a moment, then said, "He looked like someone in the movies. He had a large head." "He didn't resemble you, did he?" she asked. "Oh, no, darling, not in the slightest." "In any case," Lucy said, a little impatiently. "In any case," Dwight said, "this car just jumped at me, the way some things do. I knew I just had to have this car. It was just so pretty. It's the same age as you are, darling. That was the year the good things came out." Lucy made a face, for she wearied of references to her youth. She was almost 25 years younger than Dwight. Actually, theirs was a rather peculiar story. "This car is almost cherry," Dwight said, gesturing out at it. "And now it's ours." "That car is not almost cherry," Lucy said. "A man died in it. I would say that this car was about as uncherry as you can get." She went on vehemently in this way for a while. Caroline gazed, God damn it. Caroline gazed at her, her lips parted, her teeth making no judgment. Then she said, "I've got to get back to my lonely home." She did not live far away. Almost everybody they knew, and a lot of people they didn't, lived close by. Now you two have fun in that car. It's a sweet little car. She kissed Dwight, and he patted her back in an avuncular fashion as he walked her to the door. The air outside had a faint, thin smell of fruit and rubber. A siren screamed through it. When Dwight returned, Lucy said, "I don't want a car a man died in for my birthday." "It's not your birthday coming up, is it?" Lucy admitted it was not, although Dwight often planned for her birthday months in advance. She blushed. "It's funny how some people live longer than others, isn't it?" she finally said. There's a little break there. I'm going to sip some tea. If you missed the intro, this is Rot by Joy Williams from Escapes, a collection of hers from 1990. Thank you for being here. Excuse me. Lucy and Dwight had been married for 5 years. When Dwight had first seen her, he was 25 years old and she was a 4-month-old baby. "I'm gonna marry you," Dwight said to the baby. People heard him. He was tall and had black hair and was wearing a leather jacket that a girlfriend had sewed a violet silk liner into. It was a New Year's Eve party at this girlfriend's house, and the girl was standing beside him. "Oh, right," she said. She didn't see anything particularly intriguing about this baby. They could make better babies than this, she thought. Lucy lay in a white wicker basket on a sofa. Her hair was sparse and her expression solemn. "You're going to be my wife," Dwight said. He was very good with babies and good with children, too. When Lucy was 5, her favorite things were pop-up books in which one found what was missing by pushing or pulling or turning a tab. And for her birthday, Dwight bought her 15 of these, surely as many as had ever been produced. When she was 10, he bought her a playhouse and filled it with balloons. Dwight was good with adolescents as well. When she was 14, he rented her a horse for a year. As for women, he had a special touch with them, as all his girlfriends would attest. Dwight wasn't faithful to Lucy as she was growing up, but he was attentive and devoted. Dwight kept up the peace nicely. And all the time, Lucy was stoically growing up, learning how to dress herself and read, letting her hair grow, then cutting it all off, joining clubs and playing records, doing her algebra, going on dates. Dwight was out in the world. He always sent her little stones from the places he visited, and she ordered them by size or color and put them in and out of boxes and jars until there came to be so many she grew confused as to where each had come from. This alarmed her at first, and then it annoyed her. At about the time Lucy didn't care if she saw another little stone in her life, they got married. They bought a horse. Oh, wow. They bought a house and settled in. The house was a large, comfortable one. Large enough, was the inference, to accommodate growth of various sorts. Things were all right. Dwight was like a big, strange book where Lucy just needed to turn the pages, and there everything was already. They went out and looked at the Thunderbird in the waning light. "It's a beauty, isn't it?" Dwight said. "Wide whites, the complete engine dress." He opened the hood, exposing the gleaming motor. Dwight was happy. His inky eyes shone. When he slammed the hood shut, there was a soft rattling, as of pebbles being thrown. "What's that?" Lucy asked. "What's what, my sweet?" "That," Lucy said, "on the ground." She picked up a piece of rust, as big as her small hand and very light. Dwight peered at it. As she was trying to hand it to him, it dropped and crumbled. It looked so solid. I didn't check underneath, Dwight said. I'll have some body men come over tomorrow and look at it. I'm sure it's no problem, just superficial stuff. She ran her fingers behind the rocker panel of the door and came up with a handful of flakes. I don't know why you'd want to make it worse, Dwight said. The next morning, two men were scooting around on their backs beneath the T-bird, poking here and there with screwdrivers and squinting at the undercarriage. Lucy, who enjoyed a leisurely breakfast, was still in the kitchen, finishing it. As she ate her cereal, she studied the milk carton, a panel of which made a request for organs. Lucy was aware of a new determination in the world to keep things going. She rinsed her bowl and went outside, just as the two men had slipped from beneath the car and were standing up, staring at Dwight. Gouts and clots of rust littered the drive. "This for your daughter here?" one of them said. "No," Dwight said irritably. "I wouldn't give this to my daughter. It's not for anyone like that," Dwight said. "Bottom's just about to go," the other one said. "Riding along, these plates give, floor falls out, your butt's on the road. You need new pans at least. Pans are no problem." He chewed on his thumbnail. "It's rusted out too where the leaf springs meet the frame. Needs some work, no doubt about that. Somebody's done a lot of work, but it needs a lot more work for sure. Donnie, get me the Hemmings out of the truck." The other man ambled off and returned with a thick brown catalog. "Maybe you should trade up," the first man said. "Get a car with a solid frame." Dwight shook his head. "You can't repair it?" "Why, sure, we can repair it," Donnie said. "You can get everything for these cars, all the parts. You got yourself a classic here." He thumbed through the catalog until he came to a page which offered the services of something called the T-Bird Sanctuary. The sanctuary seemed to be a wrecking yard. A grainy photograph showed a jumble of cannibalized cars scattered among trees. It was the kind of picture that looked as though it had been taken furtively, with a concealed camera. "I'd trade up," the other man said. "Look at over here, this page here. 57 F-Bird Supercharged. Torch red. Total body off restoration, nothing left undone. Ready to show." "Be still my heart," Donnie said. "You know, if you are going to stick with this car you got," the other man said, "and I'm not advising you to, you should paint it the original color. This black ain't original." He opened the door and pointed at a smudge near the hinges. "See here? Powder blue." "Star mist blue," Donnie said, looking at him furiously. The men glared at each other, and when it appeared that they were about to come to blows, Lucy returned to the house. She stood inside, thinking, looking out at the street. When she had been a little girl on her way to school, she had once found an envelope on the street with her name on it, but there hadn't been anything in the envelope. "We're getting another opinion," Dwight said when he came in. "We're taking it over to Boris, the best in the business." They drove to the edge of town, to where another town began, to a big brown building there. Lucy enjoyed the car. It handled very well, she thought. They hurtled along, even though bigger cars passed them. Boris was small, bald, and stern. The German shepherd that stood beside him seemed remarkably large. His paws were delicately rounded, but each was the size of a football. There was room, easily, for another German shepherd inside him, Lucy thought. Boris drove the Thunderbird onto a lift and elevated it. He walked slowly beneath it, his hands on his hips. Not a hair grew from his head. He lowered the car down and said, "Hopeless." When neither Lucy nor Dwight spoke, he shouted, "Worthless! Useless!" The German shepherd sighed as though he had heard this prognosis many times. "What about where the leaf springs meet the frame?" Lucy said. The phrase enchanted her. Boris moved his hands around and then clutched and twisted them together in a pleading fashion. "How can I make you nice people understand that it is hopeless? What can I say so that you will hear me, so that you will believe me? Do you like ripping up $100 bills? Is this what you want to do with the rest of your life? What kind of masochists are you? It would be wicked of me to give you hope. This car is unrestorable. It is full of rust and rot. Rust is a living thing. It breathes, it eats, and it is swallowing up your car. These quarters and rockers have already been replaced once, twice, who knows how many times. You will replace them again. It is nothing to replace quarters and rockers. How can I save you from your innocence and foolishness and delusions? You take out a bad part, say, you solder in new metal, you line weld it tight, you replace the whole rear end, say, and what have you accomplished? You have accomplished only a small part of what is necessary. You have accomplished hardly anything. I can see you feel dread and nausea at what I'm telling you. At what I'm saying. But it is nothing compared to the dread and nausea you will feel if you continue in this unfortunate project. Stop wasting your thoughts. Rot like this cannot be stayed. This brings us to the question, what is man? With its three subdivisions, what can he know? What ought he do? What may he hope? Questions which concern us all, even you, little lady. What? Dwight said. My suggestion is to drive the car, Boris said in a calmer tone. Enjoy it, but for the spring and summer only. Then dump it, part it out. Otherwise, you'll be putting in new welds, more and more new welds, but always the collapse will be just ahead of you. Years will pass, and then will come the day when there is nothing to weld the weld to. There is no frame, nothing. Once wrought, then nothing. He bowed, then retired to his office, which was sheeted with one-way glass. Driving home, Dwight said, you never used to hear about rot and rust all the time. It's new, this rust and rot business. You don't know what's around you anymore. Lucy knew Dwight was depressed and tried to look concerned, though in truth she didn't care much about the T-bird. She was distracted by a tune that was going through her head. It was a song she remembered hearing when she was a little baby, about a tiny ant being at his doorway. She finally told Dwight about it and hummed the tune. Do you remember that little song? She asked. Almost, Dwight said. What was that about anyway? Lucy asked. The tiny ant didn't do anything. He was just waiting at his doorway. It was just nonsense stuff you'd sing to a little baby, Dwight said. He looked at her vaguely and said, My sweet. Lucy called up her friend Daisy and told her about the black thunderbird. She did not mention rot. Daisy was 10 years older than Lucy and was one of the last of Dwight's girlfriends. Daisy had recently had one of her legs amputated. There had been a climbing accident, and then she had just let things go on for too long. She was a tall, boyish-looking woman who, before the amputation, had always worn jeans. Now she slung herself about in skirts, for she found it disturbed people less when she wore a skirt. But when she went to the beach, she wore a bathing suit. And she didn't care if she disturbed people or not, because she loved the beach, the water, so still and so heavy, hiding so much. I didn't read in the paper about a dead man just sitting in his car like that, Daisy said. Don't they usually report such things? It's unusual, isn't it? Lucy had fostered Daisy's friendship because she knew Daisy was still in love with Dwight. If someone, God, for example, had asked Daisy if she'd rather have her leg back or Dwight, she would have said, Dwight. Lucy felt excited about this, and at the same time mystified and pitying, knowing it always cheered Lucy up when she felt out of sorts. Did I tell you about the man in the supermarket with only one leg? Daisy asked. I had never seen him before. He was with his wife and baby, and instead of being in the mother's arms, the baby was in a stroller, so the three of them took up a great deal of room in the aisle. And when I turned down the aisle, I became entangled with this little family. I felt that I had known this man all my life, of course. People were smiling at us. Even the wife was smiling. It was dreadful. You should find someone, Lucy said without much interest. Daisy's leg was in ashes in a drawer in a church garden, waiting for the rest of her. Oh, no, no, Daisy said modestly. So, she said, you're going to have another car. It was almost supper time, and there was the smell of meat on the air. Two small brown birds hopped across the patchy grass, and Lucy watched them with interest, for birds seldom frequented their neighborhood. Whatever there were, whenever there were more than three birds in a given place, it was considered an infestation, and a variety of measures were taken, which reduced their numbers to an acceptable level. Lucy remembered that when she was little, the birds that flew overhead sometimes cast shadows on the ground. There were flocks of them at times, and she remembered hearing the creaking of their wings. But she supposed that was just the sort of thing a child might remember, having seen or heard it only once. She set the dining room table for three, as this was the night each spring when Rosette would come for dinner, bringing shad and shad roe, Dwight's favorite meal. Rosette had been the most elegant of Dwight's girlfriends, and the one with the smallest waist. She was now married to a man named Bob. When Rosette had been Dwight's girlfriend, she had been called Muffin. For the last 5 springs, ever since Lucy and Dwight had been married, she would have the shad flown down from the north and she would bring it to their house and cook it. Yet, even though shad was his favorite dish and he only got it once a year, Dwight would be coming home a little late this night because he was getting another opinion on the T Bird. Lucy no longer accompanied him on these discouraging expeditions. Rosette appeared in a scant white cocktail dress and red high-heeled shoes. She had brought her own china, silver, candles, and wine. She reset the table, dimmed the lights, and made Lucy and herself large martinis. They sat, waiting for Dwight, speaking in an aimless way about things. Rosette and Bob were providing a foster home for two delinquents whose names were Jerry and Jackie. What awful children, Rosette said. They're so homely, too. They were cuter when they were younger. Now their noses are really long and their jaws are odd looking, too. I gave them bunny baskets this year, and Jackie wrote me a note saying that what she really needed was a prescription for birth control pills. When Dwight arrived, Rosette was saying, Guilt's not a bad thing to have. There are worse things to have than guilt. She looked admiringly at Dwight and said, You're a handsome eyeful. She made him a martini, which he drank quickly. Then she made them all another one. Drinking hers, Lucy stood and watched the T-Bird in the driveway. It was a dainty car, and the paint was so black it looked wet. Rosette prepared the fish with great solemnity, bending over Lucy's somewhat dirty broiler. They all ate in a measured way. Lucy tried to eat the roe, one small egg at a time, but found that this was impossible. I saw Jerry this afternoon walking down the street carrying a weed whacker, Dwight said. Does he do yard work now? Yard work's a good occupation for a boy. Delinquents aren't always culprits, Rosette said. That's what many people don't understand. But no, Jerry is not doing yard work. He probably stole that thing off someone's lawn. Bob tries to talk to him, but Jerry doesn't heed a word he says. Bob's not very convincing. How is Bob? Lucy asked. Husband Bob is a call I never should have answered, Rosette said. Lucy crossed her arms over her stomach and squeezed herself with delight because Rosette said the same thing each year when she was asked about Bob. Life with husband Bob is a long twilight of drinking and listless anecdote, Rosette said. Lucy giggled because Rosette always said this, too. The next day, Dwight told Lucy of his intentions to bring the T-Bird into the house. She won't last long on the street, he said. She's a honey, but she's tired. Elements are hard on a car, and it's the elements that have done this sweet little car in. We'll put her in the living room, which is underfurnished anyway, and it will be like living with a work of art right in our living room. We'll keep her shined up and sit inside her and talk. It's very peaceful inside that little car, you know. The T-Bird looked alert and coquettish as they spoke around it. That car was meant to know the open road, Lucy said. I think we should drive it till it drops. Lucy looked at her sorrowfully, and she widened her eyes, not believing she had said such a thing. Well, she said, I don't think a car should be in a house, but maybe we could bring it in for a little while, and then if we don't like it, we could take it out again. He put his arms around her and embraced her, and she could hear his heart pounding away in his chest with gratitude and excitement. Lucy called Daisy on the telephone. The banging and sawing had already begun. Men go odd in different ways than women, Daisy said. That's always been the case. For example, I read that men are exploring ways of turning the earth around toxic waste dumps into glass by the insertion of high-temperature electric probes. A woman would never think of something like that. Dwight worked feverishly for days. He removed the picture window, took down the wall, shored up the floor, built a ramp, drained the car of all its fluids so it wouldn't leak on the rug, pushed it into the house, replaced the studs, put back the window, erected fresh sheetrock, and repainted the entire room. Lucy was amazed that it was so easy to tear a wall down and put it back up again. In the room, the car looked like a big doll's car, but it didn't look bad inside the house at all, and Lucy didn't mind it being there, although she didn't like it when Dwight raised the hood. She didn't care for the hood being raised one bit and always lowered it when she saw it was up. She thought about the Thunderbird most often at night when she was in bed lying beside Dwight, and then she would marvel at its silent, unseen presence in the room beside them, taking up space, so strange and shining and full of rot. They would sit frequently in the car, in their house, not going anywhere, looking through the windshield, out at the window, and through the window to the street. They didn't invite anyone over for this. Soon, Dwight took to sitting in the car by himself. Dwight was tired. It was taking him a while to bounce back from the carpentry. Lucy saw him there one day behind the wheel, one arm bent and dangling over the glossy door, his eyes shut, his mouth slightly open, his hair as black as she had ever seen it. She couldn't remember the first time she had noticed him, really noticed him, the way he must have first noticed her when she'd been a baby. I wish you'd stop that, Dwight, she said, sitting there pale like that. He opened his eyes. You should try this by yourself, he said. Just try it and tell me what you think. She sat for some time in the car alone, then went into the kitchen where Dwight stood, drinking water. It was a gray day, with a gray, careless light falling everywhere. I had the tiniest feeling in there that the point being made was that something has robbed this world of its promise, Lucy said. She did not have a sentimental nature. Dwight was holding a glass of water in one of his large hands, frowning a little at it. Water poured into the sink and down the drain, part of the same water he was drinking. On the counter was a television set with a picture, but no sound. Men were wheeling two stretchers out of a house and across a lawn, and on each stretcher was a long, still thing covered in green cloth. The house was a cement block house with two metal chairs on the porch with little cushions on them, and under the roof's overhang, a basket of flowers swung. Is this the only channel we ever get? Lucy said. She turned the water faucet off. It's the news, Lucy. I've seen this news 100 times before. It's always this kind of news. This is the Sun Belt, Lucy. The way he kept saying her name began to irritate her. Well, Dwight, she said. Dwight, Dwight, Dwight. Dwight looked at her mildly and went back to the living room. Lucy trailed after him. They both looked at the car, and Lucy said to it, I'd like an emerald ring. I'd like a baby boy. You don't ask it for things, Lucy, Dwight said. I'd like a Porsche Carrera, Lucy said to it. Are you crazy or what? Dwight demanded. I would like a little baby, she mused. You were a little baby once, Dwight said. Well, I know that. So isn't that enough? She looked at him uneasily, then said, Do you know what I used to like that you did? You'd always say, That's my wife's favorite color, or That's just what my wife says. Dwight gazed at her from his big, inky eyes. And of course your wife was me, she exclaimed. I always thought that was kind of sexy. We're not talking about sex anymore, Lucy, he said. She blushed. Dwight got into the Thunderbird and rested his hands on the wheel. She saw his fingers pressing against the horn rim, which made no sound. I don't think this car should be in the house, Lucy said, still fiercely blushing. It's a place where I can think, Lucy. But it's in the middle of the living room. It takes up practically the whole living room. A man's got to think, Lucy. A man's got to prepare for things. Where did you think before we got married? She said crossly. All over, Lucy. I thought of you everywhere. You were part of everything. Lucy did not want to be part of everything. She did not want to be part of another woman's kissing, for example. She did not want to be a part of Daisy's leg, which she was certain, in their time, had played its part and been something Dwight had paid attention to. She did not want to be part of a great many things that she could mention. I don't want to be part of everything, she said. Life is different from when I was young and you were a little baby, Dwight said. I never did want to be part of everything, she said excitedly. Dwight worked his shoulders back into the seat and stared out the window. Maybe the man who had this car before died of a broken heart. Did you ever think of that? Lucy said. When he said nothing, she said, I don't want to start waiting on you again, Dwight. Her face had cooled off now. You wait the way you want to wait, Dwight said. You've got to know what you want while you're waiting. He patted the seat beside him and smiled at her. It wasn't just a question of moving this used-up thing out again. She knew that. Time wasn't moving sideways the way it had always seemed to her to move, but was climbing upward, then falling back, then lurching in a circle like some poisoned, damaged thing. Eventually, she sat down next to him. She looked through the glass at the other glass, then past that. It's raining, Lucy said. There was a light rain falling, a warm spring rain. As she watched, it fell more quickly. It was silverish, but as it fell faster, it appeared less and less like rain. and she could almost hear it rattling as it struck the street. That was Rot by Joy Williams. I love that story very, very much. Weird. Weird. Of course, it's weird. It's Joy Williams, so it's weird. It's peculiar. It's, yeah. You caught it, Noah. Thanks, bro. Yeah, she's a doozy. I mean, come on, man. You got, okay, so just to recap from Rot, you've got this guy who gets this old car off a dead guy at the aquarium. Okay, that's cool. You've got his young wife at home, and the first time he's coming home, he's with he's one of his old girlfriends. Okay, so that's a surprise. And then the new wife is getting along with the old girlfriend, so that's somewhat surprising. And then it turns out this car is full of rust, which is pretty surprising. Then he gets people to come out and look at the damn thing, and it's all full of rust. And then he takes it to another guy, and the guy says, "No, this is a total shithole. You don't want to use this car. It's rusty. Don't even bother repairing it. It's hopeless." And then he takes it home, decides to move it into the living room and sit in the car, and then they can look out the window. I mean, god damn. You got old girlfriends reappearing all over the place. You got the big reveal that he's 25 years older than his wife, and he first saw his wife as a baby. Like, there's just so much, so much strangeness going on in this story, man. It's next level. Yeah, no, you said it, man. She's a very smart writer. And thanks, Kieran. I don't know what it necessarily all means. I don't know that it has to mean anything in the way that people say it, it must mean something. But yeah. And then one of the girlfriends is an amputee, and like her leg has been, like, her leg's already been cremated, and it's already in its resting place, and soon to be, or eventually it will be joined by the rest of her. Like, just like it's, oh man, yeah, the thigh. It's so strange. It's so strange. I love it. There's just so much in there, man. So much in there. The first time I read that story, I was just like, oh my god, the hell. What the hell did I just read? I think that a lot when the first time I read any Joy Williams story, pretty much. And honestly, like, for the fifth time I read that story, I've read that story many times, and it never becomes less odd. I don't know. Very discombobulating, Kieran. Very discombobulating. All of her stuff is like that. I really can't think of a single story that doesn't have an aspect like that. But like, they're not like, they all are pretty grounded in reality, in the world. But there's still these like inexplicable things that happen, and it's just like, I don't know. There's inexplicable, I think, is the right word. There's a lot of inexplicable in Joy Williams. And I like inexplicability in fiction. Gee, what gave that away? It occurs to me that I don't have as much time on the tail end of this thing as I wanted to, because I kind of took my sweet time with Rot. And Rot is a little bit of a longer story. So instead of reading the other story I had in mind from Escapes, I think I'm going to go to one of the new stories in Visiting Privilege. I mean, it was new as of 2015. She's but this is a shorter story, but I like this one because it's actually like really spooky, and I'm not going to spoil too much about it. See what you think of this one. This is yeah, wait, I lost the page again. There it is. This is called Souvenir. Again, by Joy Williams. This is from The Visiting Privilege. This collects most of the stories from the rest of her volumes and includes like 13 new up to this point stories. So if you don't have any Joy Williams story collections, this would be a great place to start. This is where I started because I was looking for the individual volumes, but I couldn't find them. But I came across this and looked at the table of contents and was like, oh, this has most of the stories that I was wanting to read anyway. So yeah, it's great. It's great. There's a lot of great stuff in here. But yeah, this is called Souvenir. Think of what you see what you think of this one. This is called Souvenir. I always thought this one was really interesting. She's a lot of things, but she's not usually like spooky. But like this one is, I don't know, this one kind of gives me shivers. It's not scary. It's just, you'll see what I mean. Souvenir. This is in England, in Cornwall, and a more weird, dreary spot could scarcely be imagined. Nevertheless, tourists were beginning to arrive in ever increasing numbers because they had been everywhere else. The inhabitants of the place were in many respects peculiar, poor, and cruel, with extraordinary dark eyebrows. But the cream teas were excellent. The dogs were polite. The gulls were big. The crows enormous. The weather was foul. The graveyards weren't as full or as mossy as those in Wales, the lanes not as snug, the cooking not as delightful, few turnips, no leeks. Actually, the dogs, though courteous, didn't work as hard as the dogs of Wales. The ones without heads were the devil's dogs. Even the most unobservant tourist had no problem in identifying them. Most of the ghost stories in Cornwall involved ships and drowned sailors. And these drowned people, these ghosts, were always coming back to harass the living, or to drag a beloved into the grave with them. Sometimes they came back to smile at their mums. The stories were a little tiresome. In the old days, ships were always going down. The people on land liked it best when fruit ships went down. Oranges floated in, grapefruit. In King Arthur's town, in Tintagel, there was a big run-down hotel on a cliff. The drinking room there was called the Excalibur. It was for tourists. The locals wouldn't be caught dead in the place. A group of travelers were sitting this night in the Excalibur, drinking adios amigos, gin, brandy, white rum, red vermouth, bit of lemon juice, shake and stir. A frightful storm lashed the windows. The locals were in the chapel eating pancakes because it was Shrove Tuesday. In a few hours, Lent would commence. The locals didn't care for the tourists, never had. As for the tourists, they were beginning to believe what they'd been told, that Cornish culture was nothing but ghost stories and meat pies. Not that they were here for culture. They were here for a bit of the odd, a bit of the creepy. There were 7 species of seagulls in the area. That was somewhat creepy. And a village called Lizard, an odd name indeed. The locals had polished off their pancakes and were tidying up, preparing to play their Lenten prank. This year it fell to Paul and Paul, 2 old men. They staggered out of the chapel into the windy, rainy night and tottered off along the cliff road to the Excalibur. The travelers had stopped drinking adios amigos and were now experimenting with sheep dip, gin, sherry, and strong sweet cider, stir and strain. There were 2 boy hikers, several married pairs, 3 ladies from Ohio, a transvestite, and a French couple who sat apart, quite aware that the others were thinking, the French. The French eat horses, but they don't eat corn. The transvestite was having a quiet holiday alone, if you could say that a transvestite was ever quite alone. The imagination it takes to be one. It must be exhausting. She was dressed sensibly, sensible shoes. Paul and Paul lurched, dripping, into the revelers' midst. They both had suffered strokes in the past. One hand on each was cold and crabbed. Their eyes were bulging and clouded. They weren't going to tell any scary stories, not these two. Weren't going to tell this crowd about the vanishing hitchhiker, or the man with half a face, or the ones about the boiled baby's revenge and the body of water that likes to break little boys' backs. They were just going to play a few games, give these tourists something to remember. What did they think life was? A vacation? The travelers had been playing a game of sorts before the old buzzard's arrival. They were secretly assigning zoomorphs to everyone present. Of course, privately, they all thought of themselves as cheetahs. There was not a single exception to this. Paul and Paul had wide, rotting smiles. Once they had been young and vigorous, clever, handsome, their lives before them. But they'd had to give it all up. It seemed to have been the deal that had been struck at birth. The tourists made an effort to find them engaging. They so terribly wanted to be amused. They bought them beverages, having moved from sheep dip to blimlets to blue skies by then. Blue skies are gin, lemon juice, a dash of unflavored food coloring, and half a maraschino cherry, if available. After a few blue skies, it was clear to all that the 2 Pauls were the cabaret. It all began innocently enough. They proceeded to engage their audience. Each among them had to confess to a loss. I lost my skill at baking cakes, one of them ventured. I lost a rucksack once. A ring. My hair. My trigger finger. The fellow raised his hand, and it was true. It was maimed. There was no trigger finger. My beech trees outside Lyon. Every one. My driving privileges. My husband. It was amusing how this had slipped in there, and they chuckled. My memory. They howled at this one. It's true, can't remember. Get everything mixed up. You never know when the last time for anything might come. Now we're cooking, one of the Pauls cried. My breast, my potency, my beloved Skippy. Time began to tear through there. Inside, their lives were passing as though in a single night. They longed for a nice teeny tiny, of the give me my bones sort, for a spectral bridegroom or a brain on a stick, even a vampire or a cannibal. Anything but this deathly entertainment, these dreadful drinks, these hideous old gentlemen whom they were feeling more and more indebted and attached to, these Pauls, urging them on to even greater and more fearful acts of admission to loss. The time passing, the blackness pressing against the greasy windows, and the morning that had always come, delayed. Ugh. I don't know why, man. That story gives me major chills. I think it's because like the whole setup has you believing that like it's gonna, veer into like, these dudes sneaking up on the tourist bar to, play a scary prank because it's like in this haunted area. But in actuality, the scary prank is just getting everybody to admit to the losses they've suffered as they've lived their lives, and then to stand around and think about those losses. It's like a really dreary ending. Oh man. Thanks, guys. I'm glad you enjoyed that. I really enjoy that one. And that one's one of the really short ones, that I can go back to repetitively just when I need to fill like 15 minutes or something. Um, I should say I take that book with me out of the house a lot. Just like if I'm in between books or whatever, and I just want something, because it's got everything. It's got shorter stuff like that. It's got longer stuff. It depends. If you end up getting stuck waiting somewhere, you want to have something that can accommodate, or I do anyway, can accommodate the different waiting times. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there for tonight. That's a good ender. And yeah, to recap once again, I don't know everybody's level of familiarity with this author, so I'll hold up the books again. She's written a lot of stories. She's written some novels too. I said at the beginning I'm guilty, but I haven't read any of her novels yet. But I really, really, really love her stories. There's one more story collection that I'm aware of that I don't have yet, called 99 Stories of God. And I need to get that, but I still, like I said at the beginning, have yet to find it used. But in order of publication, there's Taking Care. It's a wonderful story. They're all wonderful story collections. Escapes, which I said I finally got the standalone volume so I can read what's missing from the visiting privilege, although most of the stories are in there. And then came Honored Guest, also excellent. And then the visiting privilege, which, as I said, collects a lot of what's in the previous 3 there and adds 13 more. They're all excellent. Start Anywhere. I started with the visiting privilege, but Start Anywhere. It's she's great. She's just, oh my God. I don't know. And her stories never wither under the light or anything. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, I've read most of these things numerous times, and they still have the capacity to surprise me every time I read them. Little turns of phrase will stick out at me, and I'm just like, oh, God damn. Some of them are unexpectedly just heartbreaking, just unbelievably heartbreaking. Others are extremely funny. Others are, just inexplicable, dreamlike. But the language is always, it's just so beautiful. She's so, God, and reading it aloud is just like, I don't know. She's such a pleasure to read aloud because it's just such clean but impactful language. I've heard her spoken of as being a minimalist. I don't know. Maybe in some stuff I haven't read. Maybe her novels are more minimalistic. But the stories, I don't know. I would hesitate greatly to call her a minimalist, even when the stories are real short, like Souvenir. There, the language is still, highly poetic and rich. It's, I don't know. I don't know. Is it minimalist? I don't know. I don't think it's minimalist. Fight me. Not that there's anything wrong with minimalism when it's well done, but I don't know. There's a lot of authors I'd put ahead of Joy Williams on the minimalism front. So, but anyhow, thank you all very much for being here tonight. I'm going to continue doing these, barring any unforeseen circumstances. They're happening on Saturday nights now because Fridays I'm just freaking exhausted. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old, but I get home on Fridays and I'll read. I just want to read and relax and like my pajamas, just like kind of loaf. But Saturday nights are usually free these days, so I've been doing them this time. But thank you all for coming over to YouTube with me, and thank you all for being here for this. It's always just a sincere pleasure. I get to read some of my favorite stuff aloud, and like hopefully y'all are enjoying it. The sound is better, I know, here on Instagram. So I think this was all for the best. But yeah, stick around. I'll be doing more of these, I promise. I'm not going to slack on it. I have no shortage of stuff to read. And yeah, but in the meantime, I hope y'all, wherever you are, I know where some of you are, I know where you are, Kieran, down under. I really appreciate you being here for this. Uh, yeah, wherever y'all are, have a good weekend. Please be safe. Please, please try not to lose heart completely in these devastatingly awful times. There are ways, there are beams of light. We just have to find them. We have to focus on them. We have to intensify them, and we have to resist this slide into the abyss in whatever small way we can. So, yeah, that's all. I know it's bleak out there. Just don't. It can be bleak out there. Just don't let it be bleak like in here. And I say this as an avowed pessimist. Uh, I've been a pessimist all my life, and truly none of this surprises me. But if we're gonna live through it, we gotta find whatever ways we can to keep the darkness out or to keep it at bay. It's the only way. It's the only way I know how. So, but anyway, with those words of encouragement, we will survive another week. I will be here next week, and I will be reading again. So please join me then. In the meantime, be safe, y'all. I really appreciate y'all being here, and happy reading. Good night.